You're listening to the Religion Unplugged podcast. I'm Matthew Peterson. Today I'll be speaking with Rebecca Gordon. Rebecca is a renowned astrologer, author, and teacher who runs Rebecca Gordon Astrology School. Rebecca, thank you so much for being on the show today. Really excited about it.
Thanks, Matthew. Thanks for inviting me. I'm also excited for this conversation.
Yeah, so you were just telling me before we started recording that today is actually a very interesting day for us to be having this conversation. Can you talk about what's going on with the sky today?
Absolutely, it is. So we have in astrology, it's called a stellium, where there's a whole crown of planets gathered together in the sign of Pisces. And Pisces is the sign of compassion. It's actually the sign of Christ consciousness, of spirituality and openness. And right now we have Saturn, the moon, the North Node, Venus, and Neptune all gathered in the sign of Pisces. And I just thought it's so funny that we're here today talking about religion and astrology, and what can be more Piscean than that? Um, yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, I love that, and I just wanted to make sure we had that in there.
Well,
Um, yeah, go ahead.
oh, also, I mean, for it might be interesting to know too that the Star of Bethlehem, supposedly that the Zoroastrians, the three wise men followed, was thought to actually be a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in the sign of Pisces, or a Jupiter-Venus conjunction in the sign of Pisces. And right now we have Saturn in Pisces and Venus in Pisces. Um, so it's just like essentially the cosmos conspires, and I would say that individuals born in this moment right now would ultimately be very compassionate and heart-centered with this kind of sky.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, in other words, it's the perfect day to be talking about religion and astrology and their overlaps. That's
Absolutely.
beautiful. So just so people kind of get some background on you, I'd love to know sort of what has been your journey with astrology? Has it always kind of been in your life? When did you discover it? Why do you find it helpful? And how did it lead you to end up starting your own school and making it kind of your work?
Sure, I'm happy to share my story. I'm from New York City, and I grew up here. I had a major fascination with the night sky, astronomy basically, and I read all of the astronomy books as a child I could get my hands on. Every
Uh,
time I went to the library, I just was nerding out and Andromeda and Kuiper Belt and everything like that. So my father was also an anthropologist. He is still an anthropologist. And so we traveled all over the world, and particularly in developing countries. We lived in West Africa a great deal. We lived in South America. We also lived in Europe. We lived, and we weren't in these American enclaves. We were like living with the community. So I was privy to rituals and people being animated by spirit and dancing and laughter and these things going on for days and days and days. And this deepened saturation of all life. And so by the time I was 14, I had seen so many different cultures, and everywhere we went, the one through line was like I was going to look at the sky and map what stars were where, what planets were where. That was kind of my thing. And looking back, I'm like, well, there was a lot of change, and that was probably like the one thing that I could go to. It's like, well,
yeah.
there's the sky, and there's Capella, there's Saturn. So especially the sky in West Africa was pretty amazing. Um, and so after all these very culturally rich and dynamic embodied experiences and rituals and dancing that I was around for quite a while, we came back to South Carolina out of all places, which was, just suburban, flat, dry, desaturated. Is that a word? You just saw the roads paved and people kind of moving through life in this very monotonous pattern. And I had just come from this wild, just wild, animistic culture. And I
Yeah.
thought, what is this life? What are we doing here? Is this all there is? Is that what life is about? Why are we here? So I was asking a lot of questions. I was super curious. I started reading Carl Jung books. I started reading spiritual books. I started reading books about the I Ching, just asking questions. And concurrently, I got a babysitting job.
Hmm.
So I was just very curious, and this babysitting job is actually what changed my life. So
Hmm.
at this time, I had landed back in South Carolina, and I was sitting at her house and I found her astrology bookshelf, old dust-covered books, and I said, "Whoa, what is that? I know about astronomy, but this is spelled a bit differently." And I pulled them all out. I thought, no freaking way. This is combining psychology, astronomy, history, cycles,
Hmm.
spirituality, all wrapped up into one, and mathematics and geometry. I thought, how can this be? My first thought was, if this is true, I'm going to devote my life to this. I'm going,
Hmm.
like, this is my language. This is unbelievable.
Wow.
So
And how
she,
old were you? Just so I know,
I
just
was
for context.
14.
Wow. You knew what you were going to devote your life to at 4. That's awesome.
Well, I was, I was very passionate about things.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
I mean, when I discovered it, it was sort of the conglomeration of everything I loved. And
Hmm.
first of all, I was also like a little bit of a critic and a skeptic. So I was like, if this is true. And I knew I was going to go to the library the next day and thoroughly research it to make
Hmm.
sure it was legit because it was kind of blowing my mind that this could be real. So
Yeah.
she came home and I was like, Margine, we have to talk. I just gave her that look, like, we got to talk. Like,
Awesome.
you know, um, she took me under her wing and
Hmm.
she mentored me through high school. She was my astrology teacher. And then she fell in love with my dad. My dad fell in love with her, and she
Hmm.
married my father, and she became my stepmother. But
Wow.
I learned astrology through casual kitchen table conversations
Hmm.
every day, coursing through the day. It wasn't like so much of a taxonomy textbook. Mercury in Aries means this. But when you're living and breathing it, it becomes just part of your life, like in a way. And she also taught me medical astrology, which is
Hmm.
very it's much harder to, argue with. It's like, well, this sign is prone to this kind of condition. And I looked at all the health conditions of people I knew and family members, and it mapped incredibly. And I did the charts, the birth charts and the death charts of all my family members and all my friends in high school. And I was reading charts all through high
Hmm.
school with her help. Um, so this was such an incredible gift. But
Yeah.
a
Wow.
part of me was always like, at first a bit skeptical, and I just kept reading more and more history books from the library on astrology. And then I found it was 1,000-year-old science and art that had been practiced since Mesopotamia. And I thought
Yeah.
this has such deep roots. It's so elegant, and it made me fall in love with math, which I never liked in school because I was
Yeah.
creating charts and doing
Hmm.
logarithms. Um, and so I started to see math quite differently. I moved back to the city, moved back to New York City, the city,
Right.
we call it.
Right. Right. No, no, I get it. I get it. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
city. I eventually moved back there, and upon moving back, I was just like working at an art gallery and doing some things, this and that. At some point, I was working in an art gallery doing these sort of odd jobs here and there. Okay, bartending here, and like
Yeah.
in my
Yeah.
early 20s after high school, trying to make ends meet because the art gallery didn't pay enough money, and
Hmm.
doing just basically spread thin, right?
Hmm.
And so I was at that point, and then my grandmother needed some help, and she lived on the
Hmm.
Upper East Side. And I was like, okay, I'll go help out grandma a little bit. I'll take off one of these jobs, and I'll just, work at the art gallery. And that was great. I had a lot more
Hmm.
time to study astrology. And I had already done her chart. She was a Capricorn. I'm a Virgo. We're both earth signs. We both have a Cancer moon. So it was a beautiful connection. I felt
Hmm.
that. And at that time, I went to my first astrology conference while I was
Hmm.
living with her. Now, that conference showed me that there was a whole community of astrologers that did this as a profession. And at this point, I just thought it was a thing me and my stepmother did.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, they were all like decades older than me. I was 24, and they were all, I would say, probably over 40 or 50.
Hmm.
And I was the only young person there.
Huh.
And I thought, oh no, wait, I thought this is not good. how are they going to pass on the torch? How is astrology going to
Right.
continue into the next generation?
Mm,
Why are there no young people?
mm,
And that's how it was back then.
mm,
And so I took an exam there to get accreditation to be a professional astrologer. I took ethics and consulting skills because I was taking this seriously because I would be a
mm,
counselor. So I thought
mm,
took ethics training, took all of the classes, and that's where I met. I got a lot of support from the elders there too, and that's where I met Susan Miller, who was I would say one of the most famous astrologers in the world. She looked at me. She was kind of like, "Who are you? What are you doing here?"
awesome.
Because
That's so cool.
she was like, I was the only young person, and I just gave her the long-winded answer of like, oh, I'm working at the gallery doing this. She was like, oh, you're an artist. I'm like, well, no, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I was just doing all of these things that I just don't know if I was fully in.
Mm,
And she said, wait, no, 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 no. She's like, what if I'm here to grant you your wish? What if I'm here to help you? You need to
mm,
look me in the eye and tell me what you want. She was talking to me like this. She was like, what if I'm here to help you?
mm,
What do you want? And at that point, it occurred to me astrology is a career. And she wants
mm.
me to say that, or she's
Yeah,
trying to
yeah,
probe me to challenge
right.
me to know that this can be a profession. And she knew that I didn't know that. I was
Yeah,
just kind of, oh, interesting, astrology conference.
yeah, right.
And that was huge. So then I would just had to go back to my hotel room that night and I was like, my mind was blown. And I thought, well, I have to come to terms with this. And I
Mm,
was embarrassed to say it, but the next day I saw her and I told her, I think astrology.
mm,
And on the last day of the conference, when we're all like packing up, checking out, she was like, you live in New York, right? I'm like, yes. She's like, oh, great. Let's meet at Effie's Cafe tomorrow. I really was excited to meet her at the cafe and stay in touch. She showed me the ropes and mentored me for many years and showed me the business of astrology. Coming back from that conference, I was so enamored, but also I felt this fire under me that I have to teach younger people and open up a
mm,
school because the torch was not being passed on. So
mm,
I didn't see there weren't enough youth there. So I opened up a school in New York, and 20 years later, I'm still
mm,
teaching. We've graduated thousands of astrologers through our school all over the world. I do a great deal of team building events now based on astrology, using astrology as a tool for compassion and self-awareness with Meta, Google, a whole lot of other companies.
cool.
Do keynotes all over the world now, bringing astrology into other disciplines, and showing how it can be a tool for all humanity to gain awareness. So it's been a journey, but like I think that I would have never ever imagined it could go here.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, there's something that stands out to me is the idea that you're this kid living here in New York where you can't see the star. I mean, in the city, you really don't. It's so bright, you don't see the stars, and that's of course the thing that you were fascinated with. Do you think there was part of it that's like it was fascinating because you knew it was out there and you couldn't really get to it until you went to Africa and these other places?
I think I just imagined each star as a sun and it has life constellating like Earth does. And I thought I wanted to know what else was out there and be in contact with it. I was very, I guess you could say, more spiritually inclined and
Mm,
also just curious about other life forms and what they're doing and who else is out there. It gave me a feeling of safety and home, knowing that there's
mm,
stars all over with other planets and life. And um,
totally.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
just
Yeah, I think also just because I'm not sure how familiar a lot of our audience is going to be with astrology, I think it might be helpful for you to just talk about what practically it looks like every day for you to use astrology to help you make decisions or do whatever you do. How do you use astrology? What does that look like?
how do I use it in my daily life?
Yeah,
Let's, I mean, honestly, I look at it when I wake up, I look at the
mm,
weather and I look at the chart. It's ex
yeah,
like it's very much like looking at the weather of the day. Like I looked at before you and I showed up here, I was like, okay, what's the sky like today? I said, the moon's in Pisces. Well, that makes sense because that imbues all life form. And
Mm,
everybody on planet Earth is going to be responding to the moon being in Pisces. That
mm,
means people might not want to work as hard, but they will want to work on things they are passionate about. They will want
mm,
to perhaps meditate more or sleep more, or
mm,
perhaps they will be a bit more compassionate and open in a
mm,
situation where they would have been closed. So it
mm,
tells me the nature of the day. I mean, astrology is really the poetry of life.
mm. Interesting. Speak more about that.
It is a language of energy.
Mm,
It's a language, like
mm,
Spanish, French, or Greek is a language. Astrology is a language. It's a language that describes the tenor, the tone, the texture of each day. But each day has, a unique content because the moon moves quickly.
mm,
But each decade also has a unique coloring based on the outer planets.
mm,
So, like, what I do personally is I look at what we call metacycles and I track history and I make predictions based on the pattern recognition I'm seeing in history. A lot like what people who look at financial markets do, honestly. It's
Sure,
very similar.
sure.
We look
Huh.
at patterns and we make
Mm,
predictions. And we see, isn't it interesting? Pluto's in Aquarius right now. And 250 years ago, the last time that happened was the French and American Revolution.
mm,
And another time that happened prior was the Renaissance.
mm,
So we see these patterns and everything is cyclical. Time is in cycles. So we can see the pattern of this year where Jupiter is right now. We can see the pattern of an epoch of like a 250-year period and a pattern of a day.
mm,
And ultimately, it can help us to act more consciously and with greater awareness of ourselves and our own drivers.
mm.
So
Totally.
I think it breeds a sense of self-awareness when you also see different people with different charts. You also have more empathy for them. And you see, not everybody is like you, and people are all extremely different. Like one person's chart might be all fire and water, and they come in very passionate and intense, where another person is all earth and air, and
Mm,
they're quite objective and they give a lot of space to things. So I think, yeah, there's a lot of there's self-awareness, there's compassion. It also brings a sense of you and I being part of something much bigger.
mm. Totally. Totally. And I want to go back to, a big part of your story. You're talking about um, astrology is so ancient. I mean, it's older than most religions. It's as old as like the oldest civilization. It's Mesopotamian. It's crazy. But it does seem like, at least in the West, the last few centuries, it's just really dipped in terms of practice. And I don't know, the data on that is kind of hard to find, but I can at least say that uh, there was a study I found that said adults aged 18 to 44 are doubly as likely to believe in astrology as those 65 and older. So you're talking about how when you were getting into it, it was all old people into it. And now it sort of feels like it's totally flipped and the young people are really showing up. So first of all, am I perceiving that correctly, that astrology took a dip over the last few centuries, or am I just uninformed about the nature of it?
Okay, yes and no.
Okay.
So right now it is definitely in a huge spike and rise in
Yeah.
popularity. And that's been happening, I'd say, growing exponentially, I'd say, since 2012.
Okay. Hmm.
Maybe even 2010, but around that year. And that was when Neptune moved into Pisces.
Hmm.
Okay, so I'm going to map
Okay,
this to something.
great.
So every time Neptune moves into Pisces, and the last time that happens was the 1860s, right? Every time Neptune moves into Pisces, Neptune rules what the culture finds attractive and how they want to sort of dream themselves and fancy themselves and their spirituality and their fashion and all of that. So
Hmm.
every time Neptune moves in Pisces, what happens? Esotericism, spirituality, astrology becomes very popular. And the last time that happened was, yeah, the 1860s with the spiritualist church. We had seances
Hmm.
happening across the globe at that point.
Hmm.
There were salon nights everywhere where there was a medium channeling the dead,
Hmm.
or there was spiritualist church came up in New York, in upstate New York with the Fox sisters. And there's instances where this was just a theme. And as it rose in such heightened popularity in the 1860s, there was also, of course, charlatans too. And that happens. But like, I think to your point though, is it back then when it was mostly older people into astrology, back in like the 80s and the 90s and everything, and especially the early 2000s, there just weren't that many because we didn't have social media. Like if you wanted to, if you were an astrologer, you might write for a magazine, but now there's Substack and there's Instagram. So with a hashtag, you're immediately in this huge decentralized community. And all of those closet astrologers working in their offices, now they have whole communities. And so maybe there were many, but nobody knew it. They didn't know about each other. And they
Yeah. Okay.
perhaps felt a bit ostracized by society
Hmm.
because there wasn't social media and things like that. I think yeah, there was a bit of a dip in the 90s and maybe the 80s. There was a rise
Hmm.
more in the 60s and things like that.
Sure.
But
That makes sense.
um but all throughout history, astrology has gone in and out of favor. I mean, we can talk about that. It's just interesting to see, and I think that it gives people something that is so it's decentralized. There's no one organizing form, but it connects people. It gives people something to bond with and connect with. Like we're
Hmm.
all experiencing this Moon and Pisces thing together. We
Sure.
all can talk about that. I have a moon in Cancer. You might have a moon in Gemini.
Hmm.
Um,
So, obviously we're saying um sometimes maybe astrology was out of practice, but was it ever kind of so extreme that people thought negatively of it? Was there any, legal consequences or anything like that?
it actually was. In 1914, Evangeline Adams, who was a famous astrologer in New York City, got arrested for practicing astrology,
Hmm.
as fortune telling was illegal here in New York. So I would not have been able to legally have a business if it was 1914.
Huh.
And she went to court. And in court, she asked the judge for his son's birth details. She gave the judge such a thorough description of his son that the judge let her go and said, "You can
Huh.
practice astrology," because
Wow.
the personality description was on point. Now, she was JP Morgan's astrologer who started Chase Bank, as you all know.
Hmm.
And he saw her religiously. Now, he would ask her about when to sign contracts and business deals and things like this. He also was told by Evangeline to not get on the Titanic boat, that it was going to sink. And I
Hmm.
think that was because the planet Neptune was rising at the time of takeoff. And that's what
Hmm.
she had predicted.
That is crazy. That's awesome. That's so cool.
We can go into, if you're interested, um, times when it was popular or it wasn't. What are you thinking?
Well, I think I'm curious, what are people saying who come to your classes who are young? What are they saying is drawing them there? Are the people giving you clear answer? Is it a lot of this stuff? They want community and they want some kind of structure, or what are people saying?
Well, Okay, there's a few reasons. I think there's definitely a disillusionment with all of the institutions right now
Mm,
that had promised a lot and they're delivering nothing.
mm,
And there's a massive disillusionment. And then people are finding astrology and they're feeling, wow, somebody, this is speaking to my soul. Yes, this sees me. And it's not just a shallow mirror, like Instagram filter. This is a very deep mirror that's seeing the depths of my soul. And when you can have that kind of mirror up in a world that you don't feel seen at all in, it's an immediate resonance. And then you want to go deeper and deeper. So I think
mm.
that that is a big part of it. And also, it's like, we're in a whole loneliness crisis where everybody feels really um, just because of technology, it's separated everyone. Right.
Right.
And so people want to connect with others. And I think that astrology also brings us in harmony and shows us that we are part of something larger, this unified field, this organizing principle that you feel we are all in this together. And it is a non-denominational rubric that is gives or an organizing principle to life and the the sways of emotion and culture and the fabric of time and who are you and who am I? It is some kind of sense making for all of this
Yeah.
madness.
Yeah, no, no, totally. It definitely seems like, especially the last 10 years or so have been incredibly tumultuous. And it seems because, we're seeing on the religious side of things, we're seeing huge spikes in people joining Christianity and Islam, especially because I think what you're saying, they're looking for structure and um, community, and that people are starved for that. So I think that's really true. Yeah.
Yeah, like we don't have the village, it used to be in villages, right, where people would all go
Right.
to the same church and they'd all go to the
Yeah.
bar or they'd all go to the restaurant and see each other. And we don't have those, town squares anymore. And people, yeah, as you say, they definitely crave that deeper intimacy.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see that the more technology becomes, woven through all culture, the more religion and spirituality does as well. It's
Yeah.
like we can't just be empty of spirit. Like it's in the human spirit to crave some larger organizing principle that binds us.
Totally. And it seems to gather physically. I think that's what I mean, obviously COVID really did to us is it made us want to be with others in a literal geographical sense. And I guess I am wondering like, you know, how are you guys able to create spaces to gather through astrology? And is that something that you would like to see done better, or do you feel like right now there are a lot of ways to engage in community?
The online community is huge. It used to be
Yeah.
with all the closet astrologers of the 90s and early 2000s, and now are younger generations on Substack and Instagram. So are they communing in real time in buildings and things? Not as much so as
Mm.
the older generations did. The older generations they would, meet at these conferences and they would, finally let their freak flag fly and be free because they had to hide their astrology in their
Yeah.
office their whole life. And so now the world is so astrology friendly. It's and I think that uh we hmm we don't meet enough perhaps
Mm.
um in real time. We talk, a lot online and we have a lot of
Mhm.
on the astrology community because it's so decentralized. We have this huge global network and incredible people all over the world. But that's actually starting to change. I'm part of a conference that's coming up
Cool.
where in October and that will be in Santa Fe. And it's actually bringing a more experiential and animistic kind of astrology to the fore. So that's going to be really interesting. And we're going to be exploring other ways of doing conferences, not just like sitting and then the person on the podium. So this is going to be more of a circle format and workshops and things like that, which I think is necessary.
Yeah. No, totally. And I think now I'd like to sort of transition from how astrology is playing out in your life and the people around you, and into obviously as we are a religion publication, trying to understand um, what is distinct about astrology from religion, but then how it has always been a part of religion. Because obviously, again, going back to Mesopotamia, that's before every major religion practiced today, more or less, before all of those were, had really been fleshed out in any major way. And so can you talk about um just the sort of tangled up nature of astrology and religion over time, and what does that story look like?
Yes, that's a great question because astrology is absolutely at the foundation of pretty much every religion.
Mm,
If you go into Hindu temples, that were 15,000 BC, there's Jyotish astrology. Um, there is the branch of um, Christian churches, Jewish temples. All of these religions have some inscriptions of the zodiac signs in
mm,
the oldest temples.
mm.
And we have to wonder what was their relationship to the signs and to time. So, it's in all of the earliest religions, you're going to see, if we want to talk about Christianity specifically, I think it was such an interesting time around the birth of Jesus, and
Mm,
the three wise men that were pretty much
mm,
Zoroastrian astrologers, right? They were following the Star of Bethlehem, perhaps a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, and moved in this position, finding omens to find the birth of Jesus.
mm,
And that's very similar to what the Buddhists and the Tulkus do to this day, right? To find the new enlightened one and the Lama. So that's still happening. But we have the Christian mysticism looking at the
yeah.
sky as a mirror. So the 12 signs as the 12 apostles.
Mm,
And there's so many depictions of this in older churches and paintings of Jesus in the center and him surrounded by the 12 signs
mm.
around the wheel, you know?
Interesting.
And the sun, Jesus as the sun, which is the center of the solar system, the sun, circled
Mm,
by the 12 signs around him. So it depicts
mm.
him as the sun, as the light, as the sun. And so there's a lot of these metaphors, and I think that's what astrology simply offers. It's just the metaphor of what is happening up there is also always happening down here on some level. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I also think, is it true that Hinduism still actively very commonly practices certain aspects of astrology, correct? Is that true?
Absolutely. Jyotish, which is the oldest tradition, marriage dates, all sorts of things are used actively in Hinduism. And I mean, most people, when they're born in India, an astrologer will look at their chart.
Mm,
I mean, that's
mm.
just part of the culture.
Yeah.
Every family has a family astrologer. It's very common, and the Jewish Kabbalistic, which is the spiritual arm of Judaism. Also, it's looking at each star and planet as an emanation of light and its own frequency of wisdom.
Mm,
So it's honoring the planets as their own frequencies and emanations. Um, and yeah, I mean, I found a Rosicrucian ephemeris when I was with Susan Miller, when I was studying with her, and she said, "That's Oh, that's my mother's." I said, "Your mother?" She said, "Yeah, my mother learned astrology in the early 1900s in a correspondence school from Switzerland, writing letters back and forth." And it was a
wow.
Rosicrucian astrology school. Um, and
Which, to
so
clarify, you said that's a Christian influenced. understanding of astrology. Is that what you're saying? Is that what
Yes,
Rosicrucian? Okay.
Rosicrucian is Christian. Yes, it
Mhm.
was a sect of Christianity, I believe. I'm not an expert on
No, no, no.
Rosicrucianism,
It's
though.
fine. It's fine.
Um, but yes, and it's also interesting to see like that time, you know, in around, I think it's like the 700s, there was a ruler that made paganism illegal, and said, okay, no more of this. We gotta just only worship God. And I think that throughout history, there was the church felt threatened sometimes where people were paying too much attention and basing their lives on stars and not enough attention on um their one source, one life, and their God. And that, they thought, what if people forget about God and just get too
Yeah.
obsessed with the
Yeah.
stars and
Yeah. Yeah.
start
Sure.
getting too superstitious? And that's understandable because some people did. And we have
Yeah.
to be mindful of doing that too now.
Mm.
You know, people say Mercury
K-
retrograde, maybe do it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Wait, I'm curious. Yeah. Talk about that. Like, how do people overdo it? And how do you guard yourself against overdoing it?
Right. That's a great question. How much is too much?
Yeah. Right.
And
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, I'm all for moderation with astrology. See,
Mm.
I grew up with it in the fabric of all conversations that were coursing through my household. So it wasn't like it was suppressed. So for me, it was just like talking about the weather. It was quite normal. But
Mm.
I do run across people who were never allowed, who, let's say, grew up in a very religious household or something. And then they discover astrology and they're like, oh, I don't want to get out of bed. Mercury's retrograde, and they almost have the
Likely.
same approach to astrology that would have been kind of pushed down them for like extreme Orthodox religion. They're looking
Sure.
at then astrology in that way. And there's always going to be people like that. It's not
Like it's out to
healthy.
get them or something.
What's that?
Like it's out to get them or something. It's
Well,
is
yeah,
that
there, I mean, it's astrology is not here to make us live in fear.
right?
It's here to show us that we are nature. We are part of Earth. We are part of the cosmos. And all of this breathes together.
Mm.
Saturn does not make you do things. Mercury retrograde doesn't make you do things. We are all being impacted by the same cosmic forces, us and the planet. So it's as above, so below, but also as below, so above. Everything breathes together. We are acting in harmony with the planets. They are a mirror of us, and we are a mirror of them.
Mm.
I mean, there were times in history where, so after those debacles with, how do we make sense of the church and astrology? There's depictions of literally Jesus moving the stars around in some churches
Mm.
because people were trying to reconcile, right?
Huh.
But then you like fast forward to say the Renaissance in Italy, the 14, 1500s. If you were at a top university in Florence or Bologna, you would have studied math, you would have studied biology, physics, you would have studied all of these things, right? And um, you would have studied herbs, right? And then you would have studied astrology. You've
Mm.
studied astronomy, math, physics, all of these, and then astronomy, because astrology put all of that together in one
Mm.
language. You had to know
Yeah.
about the body, you had to know history. But right after that, right after it was so popular and the Medicis were just injecting all of this money into astrologers and occultists,
Mm.
and you had this huge renaissance and colorful rise of sculpture and art and philosophy and all of these Platonic and Aristotle's texts being transcribed. Well, it was found out that Plato and Aristotle were astrologers at that point.
Mm. Mm.
But all of this huge resurgence in the Renaissance of astrology led to a suppression right after, which
Yeah.
was in the Age of Enlightenment, it's called, when we said, okay, we are not connected to our bodies and the earth. We are just a brain. I think, therefore I am. Um, Descartes, this
Yeah.
whole Cartesian model of life and mechanistic materialism started to then take over. But astrology
Mm.
was still being practiced. The courts still had astrologers, kings, And nobility would always have a court astrologer through history. Queen Elizabeth had John Dee as her court astrologer. So we're going to see it like even when it was suppressed, it was being practiced in other ways. Um, yeah, so we're sort of in an interesting time right now where it's definitely more popular than ever before,
Mm.
and religion is too. What do you
Yeah.
think about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. No, I think it all goes back to what we've been saying, that people are just, they're starved for meaning, starved for structure, starved for community. And these things give people an abundance of all of that. And I think also, at least religion does, and I'd like to hear what you say about how astrology does this, but because I'm sure it does, but religion uh, forces you to care about people, and it forces you to just get out of your own brain and understand that um, life is about helping and serving. And I think people, I don't know, I think the internet can sometimes put us in places where it's very, the whole space because of algorithms is very catered to us. And we have just kind of this indulgent little hole. And what's so wonderful about the internet is it often is the thing putting us in the hole, and then it also can take us out of the hole because it can connect us to so many people um, who are trying to show us something beautiful. But I think we're all tired of being in our own little holes, and having spirituality gives you the chance to, and actually, it almost gives you the duty to care about other people. So that's what I think. That's what I think is the number one thing people are starved of, and I think that's going to change everything. I am curious, do you see astrology as compatible with religion? And are your students, do you often meet students or meet fellow astrologers who practice some kind of religion?
Yes, I do think it's very compatible with religion. And I just want to pick up something that you mentioned earlier about sort of the benefits of religion, about these moral codes, and that we can, it sort of asks us to kind of stand up and help others and live in a good way.
Mm,
There are those codified conducts that are in the fabric of each religion.
mm,
And astrology doesn't have that,
mm.
So
Yeah.
astrology, I don't think it takes the place of religion. Astrology
Mm,
does not say you need to live this way and you need to help your neighbor. And, there's the no moral code.
mm,
And so I think that's what might be threatening to some. So, and I'm all for moral codes. So people can create their own, they can connect to a religion to have moral codes. But it's true that there's no moral codes, there's no shared creation myth, there's no
mm,
specific doctrine. I mean, we
mm,
have an ephemeris of where all the planets were in different times, but I don't think it takes the place. And I think spiritualities and religions are beautiful. What it does, though, do, if it's practiced in a very conscious way, is it does connect us to the natural cycles. It does connect us to nature and nature rights. So, like, for equinoxes and solstices, and it does imbue us with an honoring of the earth and the earth cycles
mm,
and cycles
mm,
in general. So you honor these rites of passage of time, the passing of time, through the full moons and the new moons and the equinoxes and the solstices. And collectively, we might release things on a full moon as a community. Collectively, as astrologers, we might become aware that a new moon is opening up a gate for us all in a group to gather and initiate something in our lives.
mm,
And so it creates a sense of personal inner work that can also be done communally, which is, I think, something that religion does as well.
mm,
We are doing something for ourselves to become um, to become more aware and more compassionate, but also for the community. But if we want to also look at it, there's like these rites of passage that we all go through personally. Like at 29 years old, you go through a Saturn return, and that can be something that's celebrated. And that's like a coming of age. That's sort of like this moment of committing to who you are, where you're faced with some real hardships and responsibilities to take on. And every single human at age 29 has a Saturn return. And so although it doesn't have the one centralized belief system of religion and things like that, it does show us these like personal rites of passage that can bring a whole lot more the sense of our own living in our truth and evolution and living in a way that is in harmony with ourselves and others. Um,
Totally.
and I'm all for celebrating those. Like I think we should celebrate at age 42 your Uranus oppose Uranus that everybody has at age 42, which means a time of liberation. There's a part of you that's ready to break free and to discover something new and to liberate yourself. And every human goes through that rite of passage astrologically at age 42. Every human goes through a Saturn return at 29. And those things can be seen like holidays, how, and religion has, right, Easter and Diwali and
Mm-hmm.
Hanukkah.
Yeah,
Astrology has these personal rites of passage.
totally. And I love what you're saying about, connection to the earth, to nature is something that I think by and large religion, eh, you know, in a lot of our holy books, it is emphasized, but it's not emphasized in churches and temples as much as I think many of us would like it to be. And I think, at least just speaking from the Christian perspective, I ache uh, to see a change in that, to see us wanting to connect with the earth, even if we believe it's temporary, um, wanting to protect it and take care of it, and understanding that even as like, even as I also live in New York City, and I'm stuck in the middle of all this civilization, and I know that like spiritually, when I go out and I go home and I get in nature, I just feel better. Like there's just something different. There's something that changes. And I think I wish we would emphasize that more. And so I think that's really beautiful that that's such a big emphasis in astrological communities.
Thanks for saying that. Yeah, a sense of reverence. We can certainly all come back to that, I feel like. And I don't know if everybody who practices astrology has that reverence with nature, but
Mm,
the ancient astrology certainly does, and I see it happening more and more. People wanting and yearning, as you're saying, to
yeah.
go back and because they realize this feels good. This feels a
Yeah.
lot better than scrolling at home all day. Or,
Right.
these
Exactly.
things that right. And
Yeah.
it's natural, right? It's we and I all right. Most early religions had a story about the sky and the sun and the moon, and that became part of the theology, right?
Totally. I am also, just in all of what you're saying and saying that um astrology does kind of lack a strict moral code and maybe some of these other duties that religion always has, kind of a trademark of religion. Do you think then that astrology as a framework for your life is sufficient enough, or do you think having some kind of philosophy or religion is only going to help? Does that make sense? I don't know if
Yeah,
I said that clearly. Okay.
it does make sense. Personally, I feel that the planets are certainly, it is an act of prayer, is connecting to the planets and connecting to the energies each day. It's tuning in, and that is a bit of a meditation, but it's
Mm-hmm.
not enough.
Mm-hmm.
And the whether to have coming back to reverence, I think it is just a sense of reverence that is needed, and not every astrologer will practice astrology with reverence. There could be that, but there could also be people that practice astrology to just find when is the best time to play the stock market, right? There's a there is, and that's fine too, but I think we do need something else. And I don't know if it has to be a religion per se, it could be a form of spirituality, but I do feel that having a meditative or devotional practice that where there's some kind of framework is important in culture, and it's myth. It's like we had at one point there was myths in polytheism, right?
Mm.
And the myths told us about, what happens when you get too angry, what happens when you fly too high and have too much hubris, right? You fall. And um, I do think myth is important. And if it's not religion, it's myth. We need some kind of storytelling that teaches us and something to be in reverence to, perhaps that is bigger than us. And it might be, we're moving into this time astrologically, called the Age of Aquarius, and Pluto's moving into Aquarius. And, it's interesting because I think about what will religion be in the future, right? And we had the whole axial age where, all of the religions were popping, and like up until what, 700 or something AD, and they were all coming up. And now we are all still in those religions that came up in the axial age, right? And so we haven't really had many major religions since. Okay, Mormon, but there hasn't been a lot. And
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
that's been like a couple thousand years.
Mm.
And what in astrology, we look at religion this way by the age. So for 2000 years, and you might have heard the age of Aquarius, it's not just a saying. For
Mm.
2000 years, we have been in what's called the age of Pisces. Do you know what that means?
No.
So it's actually quite mathematical. It means that the constellation of Pisces was rising on the eastern horizon on the spring equinox.
Okay.
And that happened since 0 AD, around
Mm.
0 AD. So for 2000 years, around 2160 years to be exact, the sign of Pisces rose on the spring equinox at sunrise.
Mm.
But there's a slippage. And so now the sign of Aquarius is starting to rise on March 21st at sunrise. And that
Mm.
will then be for the next 2000 years.
Oh, wow. Mm.
So in astrology, when we look at religion epochs, we look at these sort of like huge markers of time. And it's not like old systems go, like, but they all live together. So, for
Mm.
example, the age of Cancer, we had real matrilineal societies, goddess worship. If you know art history, the Venus of Willendorf, all these fertility statues
Mm.
were made. For that
Mm.
2000-year epoch, where it was the age of Cancer, it was about goddess worship.
Mm.
And so we, I mean, this time of Pisces that we have been in very much speaks to the main religions right now happening. And it speaks to the sense of um, the heart opening and compassion and God being out there and just being connected to that and the aspirations to connect through the heart.
Mm. Wow.
But right now, as Aquarius is starting to rise, uh, we would be remiss not to question is there a new religion that is coming up? Is there something that is emerging
Mm.
that is going to reflect the qualities of Aquarius?
Mm.
And so astrologers are thinking about this right now. And what are we becoming? And where will we find God in the future?
Mm.
And how will we find God? Will it be in new ways? And it might not be
Mm.
in the way it was practiced in churches and temples in ways that we did before. In the next, couple thousand years, it might look and feel different. It probably
Mm.
will, as it does shift every couple thousand years.
Yeah, that is fascinating. That is fascinating. And I don't want to take too much more of your time, so we can end on this. Um, but I would love for you to just kind of give me your final thoughts on how religion and astrology can partner with each other, how they don't have to be afraid of each other or yell at each other, how they can maybe get along after all.
I love that thought. And religion is so important too. It is a part of culture that we need. I think that organizing principles that show us some ethical conduct is key. I mean, I think they are partnering well right now, honestly. I see many of my clients are come from Hindu, Jewish, and Christian and different backgrounds, and they use astrology in coherence with their religious practice. But once in a while, I do get somebody that says, I need to ask our priest if it's okay to get a reading. Once in a while, that happens. Um, I think they can partner, I think, as I was saying before, with the religious kinds of holidays in partnership with the personal rites of passage. So
Mhm.
let's say, can we celebrate a new moon? Sure, why not? Can we
Mhm.
also celebrate Diwali at the same time? Yes. So we can, religion is sort of celebrating in a way these historical events that we can relive in ritual that are outside of us, where astrology focuses more on the personalized rites of passage and the nature-based rites of passage.
Mhm.
And I think they work beautifully together because religion offers this historical reverence of what has happened and the rituals that move with that and our ability to be part of this greater lineage in history. Religion offers that beautifully, and also the moral conducts and codes to live by. And then astrology offers us these personal rites of passage to honor ourselves through a Saturn return or a new moon or a full moon and to gain greater self-awareness. I think astrology can also show us compassion, though. When you really study it, I will say astrology is also a study of compassion. When you really study it, you look at all these charts and you see, wow, we're all coming from such a different swath of nature. And how can I judge that person? They're coming in with such a different set of challenges and everything. Um, and of course, the nature-based rituals that astrology offers. So they partner beautifully together. And I hope that we can live in a world where there is a wonderful marriage between astrology and religion.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that that's wonderful and beautifully said. So thank you for saying that. And everyone, that is Rebecca Gordon. Her school is the Rebecca Gordon Astrology School. You can find links to her website and other resources in the description. Rebecca, thank you so, so much for giving us your time today. We're so grateful to have you on, and what a wonderful conversation.
Matthew, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Have a wonderful rest of your day.